Now, as we're looking at this data set here, it's interesting to see how this has already been set up. Now, there's a couple of things that we need to take care of before we go any further. We're looking at a couple of sales figures here from February of 2015, and we need to calculate the totals for each individual salesperson. Now, I know full well that we're all capable at this stage of typing in an equal sign, summing up, just like that. But I'd like to introduce a concept to you guys today that's going to come in handy not just for this particular exercise, but for many of the things that we're going to be doing in later lessons. It's nice that we're able to tell Excel, hey, just sum up this range of cells. But at the end of the day, the problem is we're still trying to speak to Excel in its own language instead of speaking in our own. If we were going to ask somebody to sum up how much S jobs sold between weeks 1 and week 4, we would say, hey, can you sum up S jobs sales? Not B5 through E5. So why do we have to do that for Excel? Why can't we say, hey, sum up S jobs and have it know what we mean? In fact, we can. This is called named ranges. And to create them, we're actually going to need to dive into the Formulas tab. Go ahead and join me here inside the Formulas tab. And we're going to find the Defined Names command group. Now, the Defined Names command group is here because in most instances, named ranges are for formulas and functions. In fact, that's where they come in handy the most, and that's where we'll be using them the most. So keep that in mind when you're trying to remember where the Defined Names command group is. Where do you use them? Inside formulas and functions. So you'll find them in the Formulas tab. What we'd like to do is tell Excel that these 4 cells, B5 through E5, are S jobs sales. So go ahead and highlight from B5 to E5, and we're going to use the Define Name button, which allows us to define the name of a selected field of cells. Give it a click, and check it out. It's automatically guessed that we're going to name it S jobs, given the fact that it was the cell with text immediately to the left. Now, it's not always going to guess correctly, so do make sure that you double check that before you click OK. However, you don't have to use that name. You can always type in your own. It is important to remember, however, that spaces do not play nicely inside of named ranges. Notice that even in Excel, it's placed in some underscores. The next thing we're going to need to keep in mind is the scope. Where are we going to be using this named range? By default, it's going to expand this to the entire workbook. However, we can always limit named ranges to specific worksheets instead. However, for the purposes of this class, we're going to leave it as workbook. You do have the option of putting in comments if you'd like, but in this case, I'm going to go ahead and leave it blank. It is important to note, however, that these can be incredibly useful, especially if you're going to be creating lots of named ranges. The last thing is the refers to field. This is where you can make any last-minute edits in case it missed a couple of cells. In this case, by clicking inside the box, I can see that the dancing ants are around exactly what I want. So I'm going to lock it in by clicking OK. It's a little anticlimactic, and in fact, it doesn't seem like a lot's happened just yet. But rest assured, what we've done now is we've told Excel that these 4 cells are S jobs. So now I can place my cursor inside the totals field, and just like with any function or formula, I'm going to do my equals, sum, open parentheses, but this time, instead of selecting the cells of the range, I'm going to go ahead and press the F3 key. And check it out. There's S jobs. Go ahead and find S jobs and double click to add them to the list. You'll see that S jobs is now available. By closing out the parentheses, I can complete the sum, and by pressing enter, you'll see now it's taken all 4 cells that I told were S jobs, and it's summed them up. There's my function. Pretty cool. Go ahead and pause the video to catch up to me here. Once again, the way we created that was by highlighting the cells we'd like to name, navigating up to the Formulas tab, and using the Define Name tool to define the name as S jobs. From there, we simply, in the totals field, typed in equals sum, open parentheses, sjobs. Go ahead and try that for yourself, and then come back. Welcome back. So you've gotten your first taste of named ranges. But I can hear your concern. Some of you might have tried to autofill down, and you'll notice that when we did, it simply replicated some sjobs. Wasn't quite what we hoped it would be. It's important to note that this isn't necessarily a real-world use case. This is simply an introduction into what named ranges are. Rest assured there are plenty of real-world use cases we'll be going over in the next couple of lessons. Another concern that tends to pop up during these lessons is there are 5 other individuals here. Do I really have to go in row by row to define these names? The answer is yes and no. Yes, if you want to. However, no, if that feels like a waste of time. If you'd like to get this over with, and believe me, I would too, we're going to go ahead and highlight the remaining values, starting this time by including the salesperson's name. So I'm going to click and drag from eMusk all the way down to the final sale value of $10,252. This time, instead of using the Define Name tool here in the Formulas tab, I'm instead going to find the Create from Selection button. It's important to note that this tool only works if there are row labels or headings. In this case here, I'm going to go ahead and click Create from Selection and check it out. Where are the names that it's going to create from? Are they on the top row? Not so likely. However, they are in the left column. E. Musk, W. Buffett, M. Mayer, S. Sandberg, and so on. So those are our names. Let's go ahead and click OK. Yet again, at first glance, it doesn't look like a lot's happened. But let's take a look and see. Just like in the last process, I'm going to go ahead and start by calculating E. Musk's total sales. I'm going to start with my equal sign. Now I can use my F3 key and pick the name from the list because check it out. Hey, that Create from Selection created all of them in 2 clicks. But I can also use the Use in Formula dropdown available in the Formulas tab. By clicking on that, I can choose another named range from the list. For those of you with computers that don't have a functional F3 key, you can always use the Paste Names field from this as well, and that'll pop up the Paste Name box. Either one will work. In this case here, I'm going to go ahead and select from the list, E. Musk. Don't forget my sum. Close out the parentheses, and there we go. So go ahead and take this opportunity to catch up here, and then calculate the remaining values for W. Buffett, M. Mayer, S. Sandberg, and A. Arenditz. Go ahead and pause the video and catch up. Welcome back. So already, hopefully, you're starting to see that creating named ranges is easy. A little too easy, really. And in fact, because it's so powerful, you're going to increasingly see its value as we go through this process. The next thing we're going to need to do is calculate the total sales and average sales. Now, in order to calculate those, of course, we can go through our standard process, but for the sake of practice, we're going to use named ranges yet again to sum up total sales and average all sales. So go ahead and highlight everything in the totals column, from sjobs down to A. Arenditz. And once you've done that, inside the Formulas tab, go ahead and use the Define Name button to calculate February totals. This time I'm going to go ahead and add on to this already pre-filled name. So now I've got my February totals. I'm going to go ahead and click OK to lock that in. And now I'm also going to go ahead and highlight everything from week 1 to week 4. Having highlighted that, there's not really any place for me to create from selection because this time there is no header. So I'm definitely going to have to define a name here. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and call this All Sales. And click OK. Now that I've created those 2 named ranges, I can now calculate the total and average sales. Here in total sales, I'll type equals sum, and then using either the F3 key or the Use in Formula dropdown, I'm going to select February totals and close out the parentheses. And likewise, I'm also going to, in the average sales field, type my equals average, open parentheses, and then select all sales from the Use in Formula dropdown. Close out the parentheses, and it'll lock it in. Another benefit of having used these name ranges is that now these formulas are practically in English, meaning that I can glance at any one formula and find out exactly what totals I used, what numbers I used, where these data points are coming from. Go ahead and pause the video to catch up with me here. Once again, we created two named ranges. The totals named range, which we then used to sum up total sales, and the all sales named range, which we used to calculate the average everyday sales. Go ahead and catch up to me, and then join me after the pause. So that's your first taste of named ranges. Don't forget it. Rest assured that this is coming back very, very soon. In the meantime, let's shift gears. We've calculated all the total sales. In fact, we've calculated the total sales and average sales for all of February as well. What we'd like to do now is complete the rest of the data set. Now, currently it's asking, was the goal met? And as I look around, I see there is a monthly goal of $34,000. So, let's take a look. In regards to S-Jobs sold $36,245. Compared to a monthly goal of $34,000, I think it's readily apparent that S-Jobs did in fact meet the goal. So I guess I just type yes, right? We did it! What's the problem with this? Why can't I just type yes? Well, the problem is, I didn't tell Excel how I knew that the goal was met. I just told it that it was. The problem with that is, let's say I turn this into a template and use it next month for March 2015 sales. Well, if the numbers update and let's say S-Jobs doesn't do as well, and the sales drop below 34,000, that cell is going to continue to say yes. So it's not necessarily doing exactly what I hoped it would do, but I thought Excel was smart. It should have known, right? Not yet. We've got to tell Excel how we got there, and how we got there was by using logic. So let's teach Excel the logic we used. In this example, we're asking a question. Was this cell greater than this cell? Did the total beat the goal? In order to ask that question to Excel, we have to posit it in a very specific way, in a very simplistic way. Basically, we have to ask, is something true or not? And to do that, we have the if function. The if function allows us to ask Excel a question and, depending on the response, respond accordingly with either if true, do something, or if false, do something else. So let's go ahead and type our first if function. Now I know many of you who already work with functions are comfortable typing these functions by typing equals, if, but you've actually been doing it the hard way, not the wrong way. And in fact, if after this lesson you decide to continue doing this the exact same way you've always done, that's fine. But I'd like to show you guys a new way to inject functions, especially complex functions, into Excel. Placing your cursor in cell H5, we're going to go ahead and find the Insert Functions tool. This can be found to the left of the Formulas tab. By clicking on the Insert Functions button, you'll see a little search field. I'm going to go ahead and search for if. And once I've typed if, I'm going to click Go. This is an actual library of every single function inside of Excel. By typing if into the search function and clicking Go, I can bubble if up to the top. And on top of that, I actually get a description of what if actually does. And where better to get a description than from the people who actually wrote the code. In this case, Microsoft describes if as checking whether a condition is met, and then returning one value if true and another value if false. Makes sense to me. Once you find the if function, go ahead and click OK. which will bring you into the function arguments box. The function arguments box exists for every single function inside of Excel, even the simplest ones like sum. What it does is it compartmentalizes each individual part of the function into its own little box. This allows you to focus on one individual part of the function at a time, allowing for the utmost focus and control. As we go through this here, you'll see the benefits. The first thing it's asking for is the logical test. Now, if you're not entirely sure what the logical test does, you can always look down here at the bottom. No matter where you are, if you click inside the box, it'll tell you what that box is asking for. In this case, the logical test is any value or expression that can be evaluated to true or false. This is our question. In this case, the question is the total cell greater than the monthly goal? So let's go ahead and take that into account. I'm going to just click on the total cell. So F5, was it greater than or equal to I2? And interestingly enough, because we're inside the function arguments box, it's actually automatically answered that question. In this case, F5 is greater than I2, so we know, because it says true, that our question is right. The next thing it's asking for is the value if true field. What do we want Excel to do if the cell is true? If the question is true, we probably want the box to say something like yes. So let's go ahead and type yes. However, it's important to remember that you can't just type text into a function. You have to remember that if you're typing an actual text field that's not a function, you need to surround it with quotations. Once you've done that, go ahead and tab down to the next field. So, if the question is true, the box should say yes. However, if the question is false, what do we want the box to say? Now, usually the response is no, but let's have some fun with it, right? How about not a chance? Notice I remembered to put quotations in there. Now, what's the scariest part about building a function? For those of you that have built them in the past, you might answer that the scariest part about building a function is remembering all the commas and the parentheses. However, with the function arguments box, you don't have to remember the commas or the parentheses. This box takes care of it for you. In fact, take a look at the formula bar. This is the function we just built. Notice it took the commas and the parentheses into account already. Nice, right? On top of that, before we even click OK, we can even see whether or not this function is going to work. So no more holding your breath before you tap the enter key. Simply look in the bottom left corner by the formula result, and you'll see exactly what the cell output will be. Now, of course, if you're seeing an error here, you should double check to make sure that your boxes match mine. Once we've asked the question, we've got our value of true and our value of false responses. Let's go ahead and click OK. And there you go. Was the goal met? In this case, the answer is yes. 36,245 is greater than the monthly goal of 34,000. Go ahead and pause the video to catch up. Once again, the way we got there was by using the Insert Function Arguments box, which can be found in the Formulas tab on the far left-hand side. This tool can also be found here, to the left of the formula bar. These are the same tool. One is just a little bit more accessible than the other. Once you open the function arguments box, simply make the changes that you need to, ask the question, input your response if true, your value if false, and click OK. Go ahead and pause the video and catch up. All right, welcome back. So at this stage, we've asked a single question. Did SJobs meet the monthly goal? In this case, the answer was yes. Now, none of us want to have to rebuild the same function over and over and over again. Thankfully, of course, we have autofill. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. By placing our cursor on the bottom right corner of the active cell that has the formula we'd like to copy, we're simply going to ensure that we've got that thin black cross, click and hold, and drag until we get to the bottom of this box, and then release. Now at first glance, it looks like it works, but of course, as any good mathematician will tell you, Never trust your own work. So let's take a look. Go ahead and place your cursor on the first cell, the one that we built. Okay, so we've got 36,000, that's greater than 34,000, good. 31,000, greater than 34,000? Oh, it's not, but what's going on here? Why does it say yes? In fact, as I'm going through this here, I'm seeing in a couple of instances, it's saying yes when it should not. In this case here, unfortunately, S. Sandberg did not do what we hoped they would do. Oof, missed it by $1. But it still says yes. Now, either the computer's being generous or something's gone wrong. In any case, we're going to need to take a deeper look at this. And for that, we're going to need help. To analyze all of our formulas that we built, we're going to need access to some of these formula auditing tools. Let's go ahead and place our cursor on the first cell. Now, this is the cell that we built, so we'll use this as a test run to make sure that we know everything's working. Go ahead and find the Trace Precedence button and give it a click. And check it out. This is a visual indication of where this cell and its function are pulling reference data. In this case, this cell is referencing the totals field and the monthly goal field. Okay, everything looks good here. I'm going to go ahead and go down to the next cell here. And once again, we're going to trace precedence. Huh. That's weird. When we built the function originally, we were asking, does the total exceed the monthly goal? Then why is it that when I trace precedence here, it's asking, does the total beat nothing? Because of course the answer is yes for that. Let's take a look at the cell below, and once again we're going to trace precedence. And now we're starting to see the problem. When we auto-filled down, we didn't remember to absolute reference the cell. For those of you who aren't familiar with absolute referencing, refer back to earlier lessons. But for those of you who are, what cell in this formula shouldn't have changed? If you said I2, you'd be absolutely right. Each total cell should be referencing 34,000 no matter what. And in fact, if we click on the Show Formulas button, first things first, let's get rid of these arrows. Go ahead and select Remove Arrows. And now let's Show Formulas. This is going to reveal all formulas inside the worksheet. So as we're going through this here, we see that when we autofill, because we didn't absolute reference, F5 became F6 became F7, which is right, because we wanted to continue referencing each total one row after the other. However, I2 should never have become I3, which became I4, and so on. I2 should have always stayed I2. So we have to fix that. To fix that, go ahead and place your cursor either on cell H5 and double click, or click on the cell and in the formula bar, go ahead and place your cursor on top of I2. Now, it's a small change, so we won't need to do anything too crazy. We're simply going to place our cursor on cell I2, the cell that shouldn't have changed in the first place. And we're going to absolute reference it using our keyboard shortcut of F4. Once again, noticing that when you tap the F4 key, we now have $signs on either side of the column value and the row label. We've now absolute referenced the cell, meaning that when we autofill, Excel knows that I2 should always be I2. Go ahead and press Enter to lock that in. We're now going to autofill this down to ensure that this works the way we expect it to. By clicking on cell H5, we're now going to autofill down all the way to H10. Once again, turning my fat white cross into a thin black cross, I'm going to click and drag down to the very bottom, and there we go. So now we see F5 to I2, F6 to I2, F7, F8. Everything is now working the way it should. Let's go ahead and unshow formulas. Simply click the Show Formulas button once again to resolve it back to its original view. Let's double check. 36,000 is greater than 34, so yes. 31, not greater than 34, so not a chance. Okay. 33. Good. All right. So it looks like by absolute referencing cell I2, we managed to salvage the function. And we didn't have to build all the rest of them ourselves. We allowed autofill to do that legwork for us. Pretty good. So it's nice to see that we have some auditing tools that allow us to evaluate functions and formulas to ensure that they're all working properly. And when they're not, these tools vastly come in handy when it comes to making sure that we know where and how to fix these tools when the time comes. Go ahead and take this opportunity to catch up. Once again, verify that your if functions are all answering the question properly. If they're not, use the formula auditing tools, both trace precedence and the show formulas tool, in order to evaluate whether or not they're referencing the appropriate cells. Pause the video and join me after the break. Welcome back. So we've asked our first question. Was the goal met? And with a little bit of work, we got Excel to answer that question for us. Now what do we want it to do? Well, we probably want it to calculate the bonus status. Let's say, for example, that if they hit their bonus, they get a 2% commission on top of their regular paycheck. Now, if I just go into the cell right here and calculate 2%, let's say I do that in cell I5, I'll just do equals the total times 2%. Okay, $725, I auto-filled down. Done, right? Except that only the people who hit the goal should get the bonus. So what am I going to do? Manually delete the cells that have bonuses where they shouldn't? Or can I let Excel do that for me? If you followed along, go ahead and clear out your bonus status column. Instead of just typing out the answer, we're instead going to give Excel the power to logically determine whether or not they should even calculate the bonus. Once again, we're going to start by inserting our if function. We saw that we were able to insert our if function using the Insert Functions tool, either here or here inside the Formulas tab. This time, let me show you another way. This time using one of the function library dropdowns. The function library dropdowns are simply books that contain specific functions. The if function would be considered a logical function, simply because we're asking a question. So by clicking on the logical dropdown, you'll see there's if. And I'm going to give it a click. So once again, we're going to answer the question, was the goal met? This time, however, instead of asking the question by calculating one cell greater than or equal to another, let's calculate by asking whether or not this cell says yes. Oops, what's going on here? Why did it give me an error? Well, remember what I said. When you're putting text into a function, you've got to remember to put quotes around the text. Otherwise, Excel is going to try and read that as a function. And there is no yes function. So H5 must equal yes. And check it out, it's true. H5 does in fact say yes. Now what do we want Excel to do if the value's true? Last time we just had it say yes, but in this case, instead of having it say yes, how about we have it calculate the bonus for us? In this instance, the total cell multiplied by 2%, the same function we used before. We'll tab down. And what do we want the cell to say if false? How about a big fat goose egg? In this case here, we're pretty much done, but we do want to verify. Does H5 say yes? Yes, it does. So if it's true, it should calculate the total times 2%, which comes out to $724.90. Meaning that because H5 does say yes, I should have a formula result that says, boom, $724.90. Now that we've verified, let's click OK to lock it in. And there you go. We can now autofill this down, and in theory, it should cross-reference to see whether or not this cell says yes. If it does, it should calculate the bonus. If it does not, we should see 0 next to not a chance. So I'm going to go ahead and autofill down, and moment of truth. All right, there it is. So wherever it says not a chance, the bonus is 0. However, let's say S. Sandberg here picks it up, sells 8,801. Boom. Instantly calculates a bonus. Not a chance changes to yes, bonus gets calculated. Pretty cool. By automating this process, all we have to focus on now is inputting the data where it's asking for it. Go ahead and pause the video to catch up with me here. All right, we have got one box left. How hard could this be? The department bonus of $850 per person. All right, cool. So some of these people still have a chance. The department as a whole must have total sales of at least $200,000 and average sales of $9,000 or more per week. Okay, so we've calculated total sales and average sales. Now, sadly, I can already see they didn't quite meet it. But again, we don't necessarily want to be the ones to make this call, because as these numbers update, do you really want to be the one that's calculating all this, or would you much rather automate the process and allow Excel to tell you? Personally, I'll always go for the latter. This leaves me time to focus on the more important nuances of my job, like deciding what I'm going to have for lunch. Go ahead and place your cursor in cell I-12. One last time, we're going to start with our if function. I'm going to go ahead and use my function libraries dropdown. Of course, remember, you can always use the insert functions tool as well. All right, I'm in my if function arguments box. And the question is, does the department as a whole have total sales of at least $200,000? Okay, so logical test is total sales greater than or equal to 200,000. And the answer is yes. Okay, cool. But now where do I put the second part? Because it requires both. The condition is, in order to get the bonus, they have to have total sales of at least $200,000 and an average of $9,000 or more per week. So where do I ask Excel the second question? Well, this is the problem with if functions. They only allow for one logical test. So we need a function that allows for multiple logical tests. Fortunately, as it so happens, I happen to know of one function that does allow for logical tests more than one. It's called the AND function. So let's go ahead and type out our AND function here in the logical test box. Go ahead and type AND and an open parentheses. This open parentheses is key. In order to build another function within a function, go ahead and start typing that AND and that open parentheses. You'll notice in the formula bar, it's built exactly that for you, already with the closing parentheses. Once you've typed that AND open parentheses, you might be a little disappointed at this stage because you might have gotten attached to this function arguments box. At this stage, it doesn't look like we have access to it. However, it's important to note that you can only see one function arguments box at a time. In order for Excel to know which function argument box you need to see, you need to tell it. And the only way that we can really tell it is by clicking on it in the formula bar. So if you want to see the AND function arguments box, you have to click on the word AND. So go ahead and find AND in the formula bar and give it a click. Instantly, it drops you into the AND function arguments box. Once you've clicked on AND, make sure to click back inside the function arguments box. This is incredibly important. And there you go. So now we have room for two logical arguments. Let's try this again. The first logical test we know is total sales must be greater than or equal to 200,000. Okay, cool. We see that one's true. The second logical argument is average sales must be greater than or equal to 9,000. And sadly, they did not get that. But regardless, I don't seem to have access to a value of true or value of false. In fact, all I have is another logical arguments box. Fun fact, you can have up to 255 logical arguments inside of an AND function. Hopefully that's enough for you. But where's my value of true and value of false? Well, as it turns out, AND functions can't control value of true and value of false. That's a major limitation of AND functions. Now, if AND functions can have multiple logical arguments but can't control the output, and if functions can only have one logical argument but can control the output, maybe we can combine them and using the limitations of both to circumvent and make them strengths. So now that we've built our AND function, let's go back to our if function. How do we get back into our if function? Well, remember, we can only be inside one function arguments box at a time. And the only way to tell Excel to get back to another function arguments box is to find it in the formula bar and click it. So find if inside the formula bar and click on it. Boom! And we are back inside the function arguments box. And on top of that, because both conditions weren't met, the AND output is a false response. The only time AND will ever say true is if all conditions are met. Now what's our value of true going to be? Now that we've got a false response, we see here that it's not going to be a value of true, but we want to account for it if the data ever does meet the criteria. In this case, the value of true will be bonus in all caps. What's our value of false going to be? It can be whatever you want. In this instance here, I think an appropriate response would be sad face. So now that we've got our logical test, which is in and of itself another function, we've got our value of true and our value if false, let's go ahead and lock it in by clicking OK. And there you go. The department bonus is not achieved because unfortunately they didn't meet both conditions. However, let's say, just hypothetically, Elon Musk picks it up and sells $10,000 in week 1, bringing the average sales above $9,000, and check it out. Instantly, the bonus appears because the average sales spiked over $9,000. Not bad. Because we automated this entire process now, we can use this every single month. And it will always give us the right answers because we built the functions to logically reason with the data for us. Go ahead and pause the video and take this opportunity to catch up with us. Let's all take a moment, however, to click on cell I-12 and appreciate this function right here. You just built a nested function, a function within a function. This is just the beginning, but hopefully you saw how easy it was